This video is presenting the first of two hearings on Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. This hearing is entitled Virtual Currency, Financial Innovation and National Security Implications, and is overseen by the Terrorism and Illicit Finance Committee of the House Financial Services Committee. Hello everybody, I'm Gary Palmer Jr., you're you, and together, welcome to Minting Coins. In this video, we're going to be presenting the first of two videos, the first of two different hearings that were held in the US Congress around Bitcoin and blockchain technology. And since both of these hearings are about the same topic, it's a little unusual that they were held at the exact same time on the exact same day. So in this video, we're going to present to you the first of these two hearings. And this first hearing is entitled Virtual Currency, Financial Innovation and National Security Implications. And this is from the Subcommittee on Terrorism and Illicit Finance through the Financial Services House Committee. So there's a lot of information here. There'll be a link in the video below. And without further ado, let's take a look at this video. Let's take a listen to this video, to this hearing. Let's see what the testimony was, or I'm pretty sure it's testimony in Congress where these congressional leaders are taking this information to help them make decisions around Bitcoin, blockchain technology. I suppose it's through the lens of financial services as it relates to terrorism and illicit finance. So without further ado, let's take a look and we'll talk on the other side.
The subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. Members of the full committee who are not members of the Subcommittee on Terrorism and Illicit Finance may participate in today's hearings. All members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the chair for inclusion in the record. This hearing is entitled Virtual Currency, Financial Innovation and National Security Implications. I now recognize myself for 2 minutes to give an opening statement. Innovation revolutionizes and simplifies our lives on a daily basis. In the past 30 years alone, we've seen the emergence of the internet as an open source, accessible information tool, the popularization of cell phones, the development and wide use of smartphones, faster and faster internet and wireless access, and the list goes on and on. For many of us in this room, the millennials excluded, and frankly, based on the numbers of them in the lines at the Apple Store, I think they're even surprised at the existence and the evolution of this thing that never would have seemed possible in our wildest dreams. The implications, of course, of this greater development and exploration into the digital age is the inability of government and regulatory bodies to keep up with the pace of development. Technology in the financial space is no exception, and that's what brings us here today. From small business lending to virtual wallets and the creation of virtual currencies, the fintech space, as is known, is rapidly evolving. The benefits are clear. Families in underserved areas are finding more choice and options than ever before. People can pay for the goods in-store without the need for cards or cash. The possibilities and benefits are truly endless. The subcommittee kicked off the work in this space last week with a briefing on blockchain, one of the major innovations driving this development. Today, we'll continue the conversation by examining how virtual currencies specifically pose a risk to our national security. This will include questions such as, does the creation of a currency that is completely decentralized from a governmental structure administered through the use of peer-to-peer sharing present a new threat to the safety and soundness of our banks and to our national security? What, if any, regulatory structure exists around these emergency forms of currency and technology? Does the notion of online peer-to-peer sharing provide an increased veil of secrecy that could be exploited by terrorists and illicit actors?
The underlying blockchain ledger technology has to offer. However, our subcommittee should remain focused on the national security implications, especially since cyber criminals and nation-states are exploiting cryptocurrencies for illicit purposes. Mr. Dewicki notes in his testimony, cybercriminals in Eastern Europe, North Korea, China, and Russia certainly are taking advantage of evolving technologies to underwrite terrorism and exchange ill-gotten gains. In fact, Russia has created its own cryptocurrency to support its hackers program so that they can cause mayhem around the globe. The reality is criminals today use cash, money service businesses, and other means for illicit purposes, but we've provided law enforcement the regulatory tools to catch the bad guys. The question is, does law enforcement have the tools to catch the criminals using these new technologies and currencies? If the United States is to succeed in staying one step ahead of the bad guys, then we must work with our national partners and international partners to adopt global methodologies and systems to ensure these new innovations are being used for legitimate purposes. The U.S. and Europe remain and maintain a fairly sophisticated Bank Secrecy Act and the money laundering regulatory regime, but the question is, will China and Russia follow our lead? The rise of new cryptocurrencies threatens to disrupt the way banking is philosophically conducted, potentially undermining the United States' dominance over money flows. With that, I thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes Mr. Pittenger for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, for hosting us today for the cybersecurity hearing. Cybersecurity is an important and evolving method of finance, and it is imperative that this committee fully understand how criminal and terrorist networks may use blockchain applications to fund illicit behavior. The United States must lead by example with our regulatory and investigative structure to ensure that terrorists cannot use cyber currencies to fund their violent and malicious behavior. Far too often, foreign governments have enough trouble enacting and enforcing their own CTF-AML laws related to traditional financial institutions. So we cannot assume that these same governments will have adequate capabilities to track and intercept financial anomalies located within blockchain applications. This committee must know what it takes regarding both resources and legal authorities for the U.S. government to confidently enforce our terror finance and money laundering laws with cybersecurity applications. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and also the Ranking Member. I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair would recognize the gentlelady from Arizona, Ms. Sinema.
Thank you, Chairman Pierce and Ranking Member Perlmutter. I appreciate the witnesses' testimonies and agree that we need a government-wide approach to evaluate and address the legitimate uses and potential risks of virtual currency. I support a unified national strategy to combat terrorist and other illicit finance, and this strategy should include a comprehensive discussion of virtual currencies. I look forward to hearing how we can most effectively use risk-based approaches to identify and mitigate the exploitation of virtual currencies by terrorists and criminals while allowing for innovation and growth in the fintech sector. In fact, how can we best use the innovation and growth within fintech to counter terrorist and other illicit finance? Thank you again, Chairman Pierce and Ranking Member Perlmutter, for your leadership on this issue, and I continue to look forward to working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to keep all types of money out of terrorist hands and build on our progress to strengthen America's security. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlelady's time has expired. We now turn to the testimony of our witnesses. Mr. Jerry Brito is Executive Director of Coin Center, a nonprofit research and advocacy center founded in the public policy issues facing cryptocurrency technologies such as Bitcoin. Previously, Mr. Brito directed the Technology Policy Program at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University and served as an adjunct professor of law at George Mason University. Mr. Brito earned his J.D. from George Mason University School of Law and his B.A. from Florida International University. Mr. Scott Dewicki is the president of the International Identity and Payments Association. He's also the president of Zebrix Consulting, providing public and private sector clients an understanding of the risks and rewards of identities and alternative payment systems. Mr. Dewicki is an expert on identity, the blockchain, and alternative payment systems. He has advised financial institutions, the U.S. government, and the international law enforcement agencies on these matters. Mr. DeWicky's experience in the blockchain and its underlying technology of public key infrastructure, or PKI, began in 1996 with his role as the global marketing manager for IBM's PKI group. Mr. DeWicky is a frequent speaker on identity alternative payments and the dark web at conferences worldwide, and has been interviewed and quoted by media, including the Wall Street Journal, Fox News, Time, and Forbes. Ms. Catherine Hahn served as a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice from 2006 until recently, and was DOJ's first ever coordinator for emerging financial technologies. Ms. Hahn has investigated and prosecuted hundreds of violations of federal criminal law in the U.S., with a focus on transnational and organized crime, syndicates, cybercrime, the deep web, and digital currency, including a case against the former federal agents investigating the illicit Silk Road marketplace. Ms. Hahn previously worked on national security issues and held senior positions at DOJ. Prior to that, she was in the private practice in D.C. Ms. Hahn is clerk for the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy, as an honors graduate of Stanford Law School, where she has also taught a class on cybercrime and digital currency. Mr. Jonathan Levin is co-founder at Chain Analysis, which is the leading provider of anti-money laundering software for Bitcoin. Through formal partnerships with Europol and other international law enforcement, Chain Analysis investigative tools have been used globally to track, apprehend, and convict money launderers and cyber criminals. Mr. Levin was previously CEO at Coinmetrics, where he led a team of data scientists to measure the activity and health of the Bitcoin network. Mr. Levin was a postgraduate economist at the University of Oxford, where his research focused on virtual currencies, creating one of the first statistical models of Bitcoin transaction fees. Mr. Luke Wilson is Vice President of Business Development Investigations with Elliptic, where he is primarily responsible for law enforcement engagement and investigations. Mr. Wilson has a unique skill set and a deep understanding of Bitcoin and blockchain, owing to his 7 years of employment with the Cyber and Counterterrorism Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigations. While at the FBI, Mr. Wilson constructed the first interagency task force for investigating illicit uses of Bitcoin. As a subject matter expert, Mr. Wilson has advised the U.S. government and regulators on digital currencies. With his previous employment with the Department of Defense and the Intelligence Committee, Mr. Wilson has over 17 years of law enforcement and intelligence experience, and we appreciate his participation in the hearing today. Each of you will now be recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony. Without objection, each of your written statements will be made part of the record. Mr. Brito, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. What I'd like to do is explain what is Bitcoin, why it is a groundbreaking innovation, perhaps as important as the web, and why, like the web, illicit actors are attracted to it. I'll then briefly offer some thoughts on what can be done to prevent that. Before the invention of Bitcoin, for two parties to transact online always required a third-party intermediary, someone like PayPal or a bank. Unlike cash in the real world, which I can hand to you in person without anyone else between us, electronic payments required a third party, trusted by each of us to verify and guarantee the transfer. Introduced in 2008, Bitcoin overcame a long-standing computer science problem and for the first time allowed the secure and verifiable transfer of digital assets between individuals without the need for third-party intermediaries, just like cash in the physical world. The innovation of peer-to-peer transfers has unlocked an incredible array of socially beneficial and economically important uses. Not only are fast and inexpensive global money transfers and payments now possible, this technology is also being used to make possible microtransactions, copyright registries and global rights management systems, faster and more efficient trade settlements, more secure land title and property record systems, Internet of Things networks, self-sovereign identity, and much, much more. What gives this technology its innovative potential is that because there are no third-party gatekeepers from which to seek access, it is an open and permissionless network, just like the Internet. When Mark Zuckerberg decided to launch Facebook in his dorm room at Harvard, he didn't have to first clear it with the management of Internet Inc. He simply wrote the Facebook application and launched it on the web. Like the internet, it is the permissionless, open nature of Bitcoin that will foster innovation. Unfortunately, this also means that, like the internet, it is open to bad actors who take advantage of it. Criminals certainly use it today, and we have begun to see some nascent interest from terrorist groups. However, according to a recent report on the potential of terrorist use of digital currencies by the Center for a New American Security, quote, currently there is no more than anecdotal evidence that terrorist groups have used virtual currencies to support themselves, end quote. While the potential is very serious, this, however, means that there is time to develop an appropriate response, a reasoned response that targets the threat while preserving the freedom to innovate. The blockchain and digital currency community has been working for some time now to face this threat. Almost 2 years ago, Coin Center helped co-found the Blockchain Alliance, a public-private forum that serves as an information-sharing conduit between law enforcement and industry. Today, the Alliance is composed of 35 industry members, including the largest exchanges and digital wallet companies, and 36 members from the government, including DOJ, FBI, DHS, IRS, Secret Service, Interpol, Europol, and many others. Thanks to the cooperative work of the Blockchain Alliance, law enforcement today is better equipped than ever to take on this emerging threat. However, the CNAS report I mentioned earlier found that our current regulatory framework impedes law enforcement and the private sector from collaborating more nimbly to weed out illicit actors. They found, quote, one particular challenge in this area is the requirement for a virtual currency firm to obtain licenses in all states in which it operates and maintain compliance consistent with both federal and applicable state standards where they are licensed to operate. With only a single federal registration for virtual currency firms, compliance costs would be more manageable for smaller firms, and regulators would be better able to oversee firms, end quote. Coin Center could not agree more, and to promote a more uniform approach, Congress should consider the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, encourage him to offer federal fintech charters to custodial digital currency firms. And Congress should also consider the creation of a new federal money transmission license to take the place of state-by-state licensing. As we discuss these questions today, I hope you will keep a few things in mind. First, this is a technology that, like the internet, or indeed like fire, it can be used for good or for bad. Its inherent nature is neutral. Second, this technology can't be put back in the bottle. Encouraging its legitimate use gives us more and better visibility into the network, while discouraging its use only seeds the network to bad actors. And finally, while there is substantial criminal use, terrorist use, while obviously important to focus on, is still nascent and experimental, so there's time to develop a considered response. Thank you.
Mr. Dwicky, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Esteemed members of the committee, I'm honored to be testifying before you today on the important topic of virtual currencies and their role in enabling terrorism and illicit financial transactions. There are 4 major points I'd like to make. The first, understanding the promise and peril of virtual currencies requires looking well beyond the bright, shiny Bitcoin. Virtual currencies beyond Bitcoin and other alternative payment systems create an expansive shadow network. China and Russia are beginning to dominate a new global digital financial system of which we are not necessarily fully members of or aware of. And these new payment systems are helping to connect billions of unbanked and underbanked around the world, and we should always keep that in mind. These billions of people that are using virtual currencies and other alternative payment and remittance systems for legitimate purposes are transforming economies through their use, especially in Asia and Africa. These systems now represent a major force for the financial inclusion of the more than 3 billion unbanked and underbanked around the world. That's an important point I hope you will remember as you examine the negative uses of these systems. There's a lot of positive going on. How do we balance the profound benefits of these new fintech opportunities against the criminal use of these systems? It's critical that the entire scope of this ecosystem first be considered, its impact, its uses, its structure, before making judgments or creating laws and regulations that might have broad, unintended consequences. This ecosystem extends far beyond Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies and its roughly $100 billion market value of Bitcoin today. Other virtual currencies, like the centralized Russian and Chinese virtual currencies far exceed Bitcoin, and their combined value with remittance systems and mobile payment systems exceeds $2 trillion. A network of thousands of virtual currency exchangers connect these systems into one ecosystem, which should not be considered separately, but instead as an ecosystem, together with the other parts of it. Even Bitcoin's impact extends far beyond its use as a cryptocurrency. For example, as Jerry mentioned, the blockchain can be used for many other purposes. I am currently working with St. Luke's University Healthcare Network to implement the blockchain to enhance the patient experience and to make it more secure and convenient. The blockchain is being implemented in financial institutions to transfer funds, the New York Stock Exchange to modernize the trading of stocks, and many other applications. It can also be applied to reduce fraud and graft in foreign aid programs while increasing its reach and impact, while allowing full transparency and reduction in the approximately 30% of foreign aid that is lost to graft and corruption. Not all blockchains are created equally, and new, more anonymous cryptocurrencies such as Monero, Dash, and Zcash are beginning to gain market share. These systems now account for about 1% of all cryptocurrency usage on the dark web and are increasing in popularity rapidly. As these systems increase in usage, existing blockchain analysis tools will be challenged to remain relevant, as these dark cryptocurrencies are designed to avoid the tracking of transactions, whereas Bitcoin was designed to be transparent. A new consideration of the use of cryptocurrencies by nation states includes the Russian central bank's announcement on June 3rd that they will be creating a national cryptocurrency. Considering that a large percentage of global criminal hackers are Russian language speakers and our current stress with Russia and the United States and Europe, this development should be closely monitored. How this cryptocurrency is set up will be telling. Will it have a publicly available and verifiable blockchain like Bitcoin, or will it be a private or permission blockchain and be opaque to Western observers and regulators? If private, it could be used to circumvent KYC and AML and be used to support proxy patriotic hackers, as Vladimir Putin referred to them last week. This possibility already exists with Russian language centralized systems, especially web money. Hypothetically, what could these virtual currency systems be used for? I'm especially referring to these centralized systems, not Bitcoin as much. First, balance of payment transfers between criminal organizations such as organized crime and drug cartels. Second, fund transfers with pariah states. 3, transfers with terrorists. 4, enabling kleptocrats to move money from their country's coffers offshore. As I've said in the press, the next Panama Papers scandal could well be focused on these systems instead of traditional banking, and the funding of a virtual army of proxy hackers to do their patriotic duty. So how do we cope with these daunting challenges on managing and balancing these? At the Identity and Payments Association, we have launched a global nonprofit to create a public-private partnership to do precisely that. In summation, there is a shadow financial system that is thriving outside of our control. We need to take strong steps to understand, control, and counter it while encouraging the growth of these new alternative payment and virtual currency systems that are governed by the rule of law. Thank you.
Son, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee and ranking member, thank you for inviting me to testify on the role that financial innovation can play in facilitating, but also in curtailing illicit finance. In a year, the market capitalization of Bitcoin has gone from $6 billion to $40 billion, and the combined market cap of all cryptocurrencies now exceeds $90 billion. This number's rising every day. More people are buying, selling, trading, and transacting in these currencies for plenty of legitimate uses. In fact, I know small business owners, academics, investors, and even government employees who use cryptocurrency. And these aren't people engaged in illicit acts. They're looking for ease of payments, fewer middlemen, lower fees, and greater privacy. But early misuse is a fact of life with emerging technologies, and cryptocurrency is no exception. Although we now all use the internet every day, in the beginning it was disproportionately used by child pornographers and online fraudsters, and it's still today used for good and bad, including by terrorists. Now, the potential for terrorist use of cryptocurrencies exists, as it exists for any cash or any other type of asset. To date, we've seen only limited instances of terrorists using cryptocurrency, but these instances are becoming more frequent. It appears that terrorists are not using the registered exchanges in the U.S., but are using the unregistered overseas ones that don't allow for U.S. anti-money laundering, or AML, requirements. They're also using anonymous peer-to-peer exchanges like localbitcoins.com, which operates as a sort of Craigslist. Now, none of the recent and horrific attacks, terrorist attacks, have relied on cryptocurrencies for the simple reason that these attacks are by and large low-tech and inexpensive. Automatic weapons, trucks, and suicide bombs and plane tickets don't require large sums of money. With the small amounts necessary to inflict massive harm, terrorists overwhelmingly use less traceable means like cash and prepaid cards. We see more use of cryptocurrency in the areas of cybercrime, drug trafficking, money laundering, and financial fraud. These activities have major national security implications, of course. Ransomware is a compelling example because it can cripple critical infrastructure, hospitals, first responders, public transit systems. Last month's WannaCry attack affected over 10,000 businesses, hospitals, and public agencies in over 153 countries. And that WannaCry attack wasn't even a very sophisticated attack. It's getting far worse, and ransomware's preferred currency is Bitcoin. However, while some features of cryptocurrencies may facilitate crimes, other features may thwart them. One of the beneficial features of Bitcoin is the decentralized nature of the blockchain, the technology underpinning it. The blockchain is decentralized over millions of computers, so it is very difficult to hack. For a nation-state wanting to inflict harm, a cyber attack using malware against a major financial institution is a centralized target. But if our financial infrastructure ran instead on these decentralized systems, millions of computers across the world would have to be hacked, and they'd have to be hacked simultaneously. And cryptocurrency also helps us solve bad acts. In one case I brought as a prosecutor, we used blockchain patterns to identify rogue federal agents on the Silk Road Task Force. In another case, we solved major hacking and ransomware schemes by looking at the movement of Bitcoin. Some cases aren't yet public, but we would not have solved them had these criminals not been using cryptocurrencies. Because investigators like digital footprints, and that is exactly what digital currencies provide. Of course, we can only follow the money to an individual if they used an entity that follows AML laws, money laundering laws, since only then can we, as law enforcement, tie it to an entity or an actual identity. But many overseas exchanges do not require names, let alone identification to open accounts, and this leads to creation of anonymous accounts. Nearly 100% of ransomware campaigns and hacking rings use these overseas unregistered exchanges. We've gone after some of the exchanges in the US like this with success, but the majority of non-compliant exchanges are overseas, and this poses formidable legal challenges, jurisdictional challenges. Our antiquated Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty process, or the MLAT process, takes months of bureaucratic maneuvering, and that's in the best case scenario when we've got cooperative partners on other sides. And when we're dealing with an uncooperative country, we might not get any evidence at all. We need more resources to quickly get at electronic evidence overseas, funding more attaché positions, and better systems for processing these MLATs, which are absolutely critical to us getting overseas electronic evidence. For those entities in uncooperative countries, we need more statutory authority to go after their business segments that rely upon U.S. companies for support, servers, communications, software, and banks. Now, there are numerous entities in the space with robust AML and compliance programs, and these platforms are some of our best partners. In fact, the head of an agency in Treasury told me that the SARs that they are seeing out of digital currency companies are superior to those from large financial institutions, despite fewer compliance resources. And in over a decade that I spent as a federal prosecutor, the fastest turnaround I ever got on a subpoena was from a digital currency company. But with broader adoption, these companies' compliance resources are being stretched. We want them to be spending those resources on keeping bad actors off their platforms and developing tools to spot fraudulent activity, not addressing the vagaries of 50 different state regulatory regimes. The idea of a federal solution to harmonize state laws is an area where Congress could help. And also an area where Congress could help is we have an urgent need for resources to be devoted to this space immediately and across the board at all agencies. It's simply not sufficient to have only a handful of people at each federal agency focused on cryptocurrency when it is affecting so many areas that touch upon our national security. Thank you very much for inviting me to share my thoughts on this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Levin. Before you recognize it, I realize now I was giving you an extra syllable in the name as I was pronouncing it during the introduction. So you can just put it on your asset sheet that you're worth more now. I would recognize you for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Perlmutter, and members of the subcommittee. My name is Jonathan Levin, and I'm one of the co-founders of Chainalysis. Chainalysis is the leading provider of investigation software and risk management solutions for virtual currencies. In this field, we identify illicit use of virtual currencies, including terrorist financing. We provide tools to private industry and law enforcement to mitigate these risks and the activity that poses a risk to our society. I wish to prepare my briefing into 3 significant sections that I believe are worth considering when looking at the risk of virtual currencies. First, the potential for virtual currencies. Second, the nature of this technology. And finally, the current use of virtual currencies. The internet started in the early 1960s, but did not enter the mainstream until the creation of an easy-to-use consumer layer and developer tools that happened in the mid-90s. Today, we almost all use the internet every day prior to entering this room and even afterwards. The US government played an instrumental role in providing essential layers for private industry to develop business models and products for us as consumers to use. However, there was no payments layer baked into the internet. This is where the motivation behind Bitcoin came in. Efforts to curb the demand for this new payment infrastructure has not led to success. In February 2017, the People's Bank of China put pressure on virtual currency exchanges to stop trading. This led to an uptick in peer-to-peer Bitcoin transactions that are out of the purview of the state. The transaction volume went from 2.5 million RMB to over 100 million RMB on these exchanges. And these cannot be regulated, and it diminishes the oversight of the state. Bitcoin and other virtual currencies are decentralized, as we've heard, and as such, they are censorship resistant. Receiving Bitcoin can be done by anyone with basic access to computing anywhere in the world. There is no need to register or supply anyone with identifying information in order to receive Bitcoin. There is no ability to freeze assets or seize someone's virtual currencies without obtaining access to their computer. Virtual currencies in this way are ultimately bearer instruments, and the person in control of a private key is the ultimate owner of virtual currency. In order to facilitate this system, however, Bitcoin makes every transaction public. These transactions are recorded in a single transaction ledger, the blockchain. However, these entries are pseudonymous and do not relate to real-world entities. Chainalysis analyzes this blockchain to identify which transactions have been performed by the same entity and links these entities to real-world services such as exchanges, merchant processors, and underground marketplaces. This blockchain analysis can identify the underlying activity behind virtual currency transactions and the on-ramps and off-ramps and the connections to the existing financial system. Terrorist organizations are not in the business of speculating on the price of virtual currencies, but rather they may be interested to use virtual currencies for the following use cases: using virtual currencies in cybercriminal activities to fund operations, crowdfunding operations from sympathizers around the world, and paying for everyday items and internet infrastructure. Cybercriminals so far have mainly used Bitcoin to buy and sell capabilities to launch cyber attacks and extort their victims when they do. Their use of Bitcoin cannot be attributed to anonymity, but rather convenience and its ability to move and transcend borders. There has not been any evidence yet of terrorist organizations running any of these criminal enterprises. We've heard of the recent ransomware campaign as War and Cry, and that was leveraged by cybercriminals rather than terrorist organizations. However, despite ransomware's ineffective campaign, some of these criminal enterprises are making substantial sums of money, as I allude to in my written testament. In July 2016, there is the only verifiable public case of crowdfunding known by a terrorist organization. The campaign was launched over Twitter and was not very successful and raised a total sum of $1,000. The nature of virtual currencies meant that Chainalysis was able to size the potential threat and also identify the ultimate source and destination and connection to the existing financial system. Terrorists, like any other person, may use Bitcoin to pay for internet infrastructure and everyday goods and services. There are merchants around the world that accept virtual currency, including blue-chip companies. Using tools like ours at Chainalysis, these purchases can lead to useful leads in investigations and uncover the goods and services purchased, as well as attribute the identity of the individuals. The potential for virtual currencies to bring radical new business models to the internet and ways of organizing social and economic relations remains large. The pace of change in this domain is rapid, and the eventual outcomes unpredictable. The current use of virtual currencies is mainly financial speculation on their eventual impact on the world. The use of virtual currencies by terrorist organizations is very limited due to lack of awareness and trust placed in virtual currencies. There is a growing awareness among companies and government agencies about the potential threats and their topologies. Virtual currencies continue, however, to evolve rapidly. Private businesses like ours and the public sector should endeavor to mitigate these threats, but be cognizant of the future potential for this technology. Thank you.
Mr. Wilson, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee members. My name is Luke Wilson. I am the Vice President of Business Development and Investigations for Elliptic. Elliptic software is used to identify illicit activity on the Bitcoin blockchain, and we provide our services to the leading Bitcoin companies and law enforcement agencies globally. We're located in London and Arlington, Virginia. Today's hearing on virtual currency, financial innovation, and national security implications is a very good first step toward understanding this quickly evolving technology. My previous employment with the FBI allowed me to investigate several crimes that involve Bitcoins. My experience is that Bitcoin is not or should not be alarming to investigators or private companies. Bitcoin is thought to be anonymous by some criminals. In reality, it's far from anonymous, and companies like Elliptic have assisted law enforcement and private industries to identify who is behind the illicit Bitcoin transactions. Elliptic's software and expertise has assisted in terrorism, ransomware, cyber extortion cases, and illegal arms trafficking cases, to name a few. In all of these cases, we've provided intelligence and leads that help investigators to trace Bitcoin transactions and identify who is transacting. This is all made possible by the record of transaction kept on the blockchain. All Bitcoin transactions are stored on the blockchain, including those performed by criminals. The importance of this blockchain record cannot and should not be undervalued, as it provides a public and permanent and incorruptible record of transactions, the like of which is not available with any other payment method. I would really like to go through a couple cases that I helped when I was in the Bureau. As I talk about the firearm case, this is a case that I helped actually while at Elliptic. There was a law enforcement agency that was looking at an illegal arms trafficker. If the illegal arms trafficker did not purchase the illegal arms off of a dark market site using Bitcoins, this individual would never have been placed in handcuffs and put in jail. It's because of the Bitcoin blockchain that they were able to come to Elliptic, and we were able to trace those transactions and find out where the individual was purchasing the firearms. And then now we could tie that back to that individual. So when I say that we have, a way to trace this, this is what law enforcement and private industry does. They come and talk to a company like Elliptic or Chainalysis. My experience in counterterrorism and virtual currencies make me well placed to evaluate the risk by the potential terrorist use of Bitcoin. My experience is that there have been very, very few verified terrorism cases in which Bitcoin was used, and that in all of these cases, law enforcement was able to trace the flows of Bitcoin to subjects and possible co-conspirators. While I cannot say what the future holds for terrorists' use of Bitcoin/virtual currencies, I can say that it's very small to date, and that we have been successful in assisting law enforcement and private industries to combat that threat. Thank you for your time.
I thank each one of you for testifying. The chair now yields himself 5 minutes for questions. So, Ms. Hahn, I was fascinated by Mr. Levin's comments in both his written testimony and his statement that most of the protocols and infrastructure are decades old, pioneered by academia and the government. And so as you talked about the additional resources, is it even possible for someone in a bureau, someone in an agency to keep up with the fast pace of development? So address that if you can.
Sure. Well, I think it's twofold. First, it's personnel, right, which require training and being brought up to speed on these technologies. But second, it's the systems. And I think the systems are very important because oftentimes we will be getting from these companies that are providing us metadata in response, for example, to a search warrant or a subpoena, and we, on our old systems, can't even access them. They won't even run that data, and that's a real problem. So there's, I think, yes, it's possible, but you have to look at the resource question from both personnel and systems resources. And I mentioned the same thing with respect to speeding up the processing of MLATs. It's not just personnel, it's also just the systems themselves.
Okay, so you bring in personnel today, you give them a really deep education, and a year from now, they've been covered up with investigations and keeping up. Mr. Levin, are those personnel we bring on today going to be able to keep up?
So I think that as we look forward to see what innovations happen, the incentive needs to be placed on the private sector to be able to provide tools and keep up with the innovation that happens. And I think that it is our duty to provide training and education as part of offering software and tools. And that is something that we are actively doing. It needs to be regular and it needs to be more frequent than it currently is.
That's kind of my impression, just sitting up here being pretty unfamiliar with any technology. And so do you envision, Mr. Levin, an ability to set up the protocol that will give the protections and yet allow access by law enforcement to where we don't have to have the resources? Because I just, as a policymaker, I would tell you, I see an unending need to hire more personnel, and the personnel we hired last year are not going to be very good by next year and the year after, completely not up to date. And so we just keep building that bureaucracy. Somewhere we need to get the mobileness to tap into the private sector's knowledge, and therefore we leave the law enforcement to the law enforcement people, not keeping up with technology. So if either one of you, I mean, Mr. Luke, if you want to jump in here on this too, I really would like a discussion kind of on that, and fairly short, but we've got 2 minutes here. Lead off, Mr. Levin, if you would, and then go to Ms. Hahn and Mr. Wilson. I'd really like your input.
So I think that one thing that I have seen personally in law enforcement is actually we need to not hire new people every year, and that people need to become subject domain experts in order to be able to counter the threats that we have. That someone coming in new would need to learn about the innovation of this technology and its history and its evolution rather than just the latest and greatest new bit of technology. I think also I've seen several efforts by regulatory agencies and oversight agencies to automate processes to actually take away personnel from copying down notes off printed out sheets and submit things programmatically that would definitely assist in making sure that the government's resources are best used.
Yes, well, I think it's also a question of shifting resources because I was brought into the department as a gang and a murder prosecutor, and then I switched. So it's not that I became useless. I think you have personnel that are capable of adapting to new areas. I think one of the problems is that the government and a lot of the agencies are very siloed. So, for example, we have a cyber unit, and only the cyber unit is maybe getting trained on these cryptocurrencies or the darknet, but the fact is it affects the narcotics unit, it affects the national security unit, it affects the white-collar unit, the financial fraud unit, the public corruption unit. So I think you can shift those resources, but it needs to be across the board. At the same time, I do think resources are necessary for training, not only in government, but I mean the public-private partnerships, the Blockchain Alliance goes a long way. They have webinars that people can watch. So these are actually free resources.
Okay, Mr. Wilson, and pretty brief. I'm out of time here.
Yeah, that's all right. I agree with Ms. Hahn. It's overall training. Anything that you can do with regular cash, you can do with Bitcoin or virtual currencies. So there needs to be a centralized training. And you have a huge, what I'd say, technological gap as well. Some law enforcement agencies and private industry are just now figuring out that you can trace these transactions. I think those are two big areas. I was a counterterrorism agent before I went to the cyber task force. I took it upon myself to learn these things and put the task force together. So those are just some of the huge hurdles that they're facing out there.
Thank you. Thanks each. My time has expired, and recognize Mr. Lynch for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to take a minute to say thank you to you, Chairman Pierce, and also Ranking Member Perlmutter, for your really forward-leaning approach on this issue. And also want to thank the witnesses. This is not the first time we've met, and I want to thank you for all the energy you've put into trying to get Congress up to speed on this issue. Usually we're very much behind, but in this issue, I think with your help, we're almost up to speed. Ms. Hahn, also I want to thank you for highlighting the issue of personnel and resources. I was in Bahrain and Dubai, did a little work in the Gulf, and we have one Treasury attaché that's responsible for, I think, 5 different countries. And he's bouncing back and forth with central bankers and totally doing a great job, don't get me wrong, but totally overstretched, I think, in terms of our resources. So that's probably something that we can work on. One of the problems I'm trying to grapple with is the asymmetry here of 3 guys in a truck and a bunch of steak knives on a bridge in Manchester, and then our sort of our defense out there talking about cybersecurity and larger systems. There's I think an effort by ISIL and others to use this interstitial approach where they hit us where we're not protected. And I don't know how we do get at that. I think this is an emerging issue for us. I know that, Mr. Brito, you described this as anecdotal, some of the use by terrorists, but I think we've got to be prepared as the use of this becomes more broad than, by the general public, then I think certainly, nefarious elements will capitalize as well. On the personnel side, in terms of trying to train our people, and the money and the time involved in getting people really trained as experts in this, in cyber currency use and all the other issues involved. I mean, when we send our young people to West Point and to the Naval Academy, they go to school and then, excuse me? Oh yeah, Air Force Academy at Colorado Springs as well. I'm just using it as an example, not exclusive. But we commit them, they commit for 5 years beyond that. And so for our investment, we get the return. Is there a way that we can do you think it would be wise for us to set up some similar system where we got a lot of bright people who will be all over this stuff. I think it really appeals to some of the skills and ability of our young people. Create a system like that, scholarships, maybe identify a handful of universities who would love to I think, offer this type of instruction and education. Is that something that you have seen anywhere in our university systems, MIT, any places like that?
I could speak to that. I taught cybercrime and digital currency class at Stanford, and it was cross-registration from a number of departments: law, business school, computer scientists, engineers. And I'm pleased to say that a number of those students actually ended up going to serve in the government across in national security capacities in our U.S. attorney's offices. So I think there is the interest there still in serving in those capacities, albeit in this new emerging field.
Yeah. Well, how about on the, that's good to hear. I think we just need to do more of it. On the other side, trying to build a system, an agency ourselves and keep it up to speed. We haven't done a very good job with that internally with our government. We've got legacy systems that are a problem. I think, and I just want your feedback, any of you, wouldn't it be better to buy the system in terms of, or purchase the system on the private side and have, cutting edge technology rather than trying to construct it ourselves, because Congress is, subject to appropriations and dear Lord, we are terribly slow in keeping up. I'm just like your own thoughts on that. Anybody?
So I agree with you, and I think Mr. Levin and Mr. Wilson are being too modest to say that their companies are building exactly the system that allows law enforcement, and not just law enforcement, but digital currency firms and banks who deal with these networks to have greater visibility into the network.
Great. I see my time has expired. Mr. Chairman, I would just ask unanimous consent if we could enter into the record this report, Terrorist Use of Virtual Currencies by the Center for New American Security by Goldman, Murayama, Rosenberg, Cervalli, and Solomon Strauss.
Without objection.
Thank you.
It's entered. The gentleman's time has expired, and just by way of kind of updating the committee, after our meeting, then we asked Mr. Budd and Mr. Davidson and Mr. Lynch and Mr. Foster to come together and really address this idea of adjusting a protocol and the reactiveness of our team, our governmental team, to sort of keep up and see if we can think of a new approach to this. So again, thank the gentleman, and just it looks like we've got 5 really good people here that you all can work with. Would recognize the gentleman, Mr. Pittenger, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank each of you for your participation with us and the many times that you've come to address us and engage in this dialogue. Certainly something that, as you pointed out, Ms. Hahn, it's a growing sphere of engagement by those who seek illicit transfer of payments, $90 billion. I'd never heard that figure before today. And that will certainly continue to increase. And I think we have found in the past that those with nefarious interest look for, like water going downhill. If they get blocked one way, they're going to go somewhere else. And I think we should be anticipating, not waiting, but anticipating that they will enter into this arena at a greater dimension. To that end, I think the points have been well made in terms of personnel and training. I would like to get your thoughts, just for clarification. If somebody has sophisticated cyber training, they've been certified by SAS or some company like that, is that a strong foundation for being able to move over to address these blockchain types of transactions?
Is that question to me, Mr. Pittenger?
Sure, or any of you who would like to answer, but just go ahead.
All right. I think the answer is it's not necessary. I think it would provide a good foundation, but I founded a digital currency task force out in San Francisco comprised of numerous agencies, and none of them had that SAS training. Mm-hmm. All of them, however, were very interested in this new field, and they were looking for something new in their career. Perhaps they had done cartel cases before, and so everyone brought something different. And actually, the technology, a bit counterintuitively, is not that hard to get up to speed on. Mm-hmm. I mean, I really do think that you watch a few webinars, you go to a few training sessions, and all of a sudden, you really know a lot more than you thought possible in a short amount of time.
If I could ask you then, to that point, you question the merits of bringing on new people. Why would that be if it was able to be adapted so easily?
Oh, I don't think there would be any problem with bringing on new people. I just, to the chairman's question about do all of our old people become obsolete, our existing people, I think that need not be the case either. But certainly, of course, I would always say new people, more people are better, because we have, dealing with criminals.
Needs to be the right type of people.
Right type of people, but dealing with criminals, we have too much business. So, yeah, good point.
One of the big problems, though, in this whole conversation is it's overly focused on understanding the blockchain.
Okay.
That's a component, and it's actually a fairly small component of the overall virtual currency threat and usage by criminal organizations, et cetera. You really, it's not so much a matter of understanding the technology behind the blockchain. It's having people who understand global payment systems that are on the cutting edge and understand the fintech, the mobile payment systems, the blockchain systems. It's much larger than just, hey, let's get some smart kids that understand the blockchain. You really need to understand the entire payments world, and that's what I've seen in a lot of the training that I've done within U.S. law enforcement and law enforcement around the world. They're just trying to grapple with this one piece, the bright, shiny Bitcoin, I call it. They really need a much broader understanding, and that isn't something that necessarily comes easily from quick training. And probably what you need to do is foster a better relationship, this public-private partnership, so that the payment processors, the Coinbases, the First Datas, you have a better relationship with them because they're the ones that have this knowledge that takes, frankly, decades to really understand all of these systems globally, and that's what's missing.
Yes, sir. Mr. Brito.
So I have to agree with Mr. Dewicki, and I think part of what's happening in this conversation is that myself, Ms. Hahn, Mr. Love, and Mr. Wilson are here because we're focused on decentralized digital currencies. Cryptocurrencies is another name for that. Bitcoin being the #1 example. It was the first cryptocurrency, and it is the largest cryptocurrency today. That said, what Mr. Dewicki is rightly pointing out is that if you think of a pie chart, decentralized cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin account for a tiny sliver. You have other digital currencies that are centralized, and as Mr. Dewicki was pointing out, account for a lot of the use by illicit actors.
Well, all your points are well taken. I think we really have our work cut out just getting this on the radar screen to make sure that people see this venue and so that we can address it in a comprehensive way. I don't think the public at large, and frankly, I don't think the Congress fully understands the depth of opportunity that's there for those who seek an illicit transfer of funds. Thank you. Yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired, and just sort of in response to Mr. Dewicki, you're exactly right. But our hearing today is on virtual currencies, and so we're trying to get that. And then, but we had yesterday the meeting that was digging into the actions and the patterns of actions. We'll merge these two together in the future, and again, that's our kind of subgroup of 4 people that are tasked with that. But again, a very accurate observation. Chair would now recognize Mr. Keywan from Nevada for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the ranking member for organizing this hearing, and thank you to all of you for testifying this morning. I just have a couple of quick questions. One regarding mixing. For my colleagues who might not know, since the transactions of some cryptocurrencies are recorded on the blockchain, mixing is a way to launder payments that may be connected to tainted sources. Ms. Hahn, since you prosecuted some of these cases, are you worried that mixing might become so sophisticated that it might become very hard for law enforcement to track some of these transactions for criminal activity?
Yes, I am. I am. Right now, the technology isn't there to be as sophisticated for the mixers and tumblers. We hear them called tumblers. But of course, anything that further anonymizes things make it more difficult for law enforcement authorities to kind of follow the trail. So I am worried about it. We've heard analogies to, Jonathan mentioned earlier, it's like a mask. I mean, you think of it, if you're a person, you're going in to do some bad act and you're wearing a mask. We can't see you because you've disguised yourself. But if you wear that mask again, later we know it's you. The problem with tumblers and mixers are that, let's just say, all of those masks that people are wearing get taken off and melted all together, and then they're different, the masks are reconstituted and put on. So then we don't know that it's you again. I don't know if that analogy makes sense, but that's kind of how we think of them. So we do think that's a problem, but I think more of a problem right now are the overseas unregulated exchanges. And those are in countries that you might guess at, and we simply see those nefarious actors using these cryptocurrencies are not using these U.S. regulated exchanges. They are using the ones that are overseas.
So do you think that we need to put restrictions on the mixing?
Yeah, so if I could also comment. So I think that there have been, FinCEN guidance refers to services that transmit virtual currencies on the behalf of other people, and there's a good chance that mixers do come under that jurisdiction. So if it is in the United States, there are actually some mechanisms that law enforcement might be able to use to put pressure on those mixers.
If I could add, in some cases you can think of completely legitimate regulated exchanges in this country. You send money to them. At that point, it sort of becomes invisible to the software, and then eventually money goes out. And so in some ways, you can think of those as mixers. But it's not a problem because they are complying with FinCEN guidance and with the Bank Secrecy Act. So the problem is not so much that there's mixing happening, that there's a third party that's keeping funds on behalf of a third party. It's that you have mixers that are completely unregulated, not subject to or not complying with BSA regulation. And I suspect, as Ms. Hahn is saying, that these are overseas as well.
And that's a critical part of this, too, is the global nature of this, and that you've got thousands of these unregulated exchanges that are not limited to just that one segment of virtual currencies being centralized or decentralized, but also the centralized virtual currencies as defined by FATF. And acting as a mixer, the best way to mix, actually, is to go to one of these unregulated exchanges and exchange Bitcoin for Litecoin, for Darkcoin, or for web money, or one of the other non-cryptocurrency systems, and then change it back. You're not following that. It's better than a mixer.
And absolutely, as I alluded to in my written testimony, 100% of ransomware campaigns we've seen cashing out through exactly these overseas exchanges. So it's a huge problem.
And so I would simply put a point on it by saying mixing is not a problem. Again, mixing is a technology that is neither good nor bad. It's mixing and not complying with the BSA that's a problem.
But to your question about could we regulate these things, and I appreciate Mr. Levin's comment that in the FinCEN guidance it could be construed to regulate, to reach mixers or tumblers. I'm not so sure that a prosecutor or FinCEN would take that aggressive of a view. Maybe they would, but certainly if this were included in Section 1960 as explicitly clear, that gives that statutory authority gives prosecutors a lot more comfort that, oh, no, this technology is absolutely included in a 1960 definition. So I think that would be important. It's not, FinCEN guidance alone is not always enough for us to bring these new cases that are the first cases of first impression.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member.
Thank you, gentlemen's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Tipton, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, panel. Ms. Hahn, maybe you'd like to follow up a little bit on the last question when you're talking about the 1960 regulation and listening to Mr. Dewicki describing the mixers. Given all of the complexity that is there, even without authorization, how difficult is it really going to be for law enforcement to be able to track this information, even with authorization? I think there was a RAND report that came out of some of the criminal activity that is going on, RAND National Defense Research Institute, saying that criminals are increasingly gaining access to technology and encryption tools that could allow them to design their own virtual currencies to circumvent the global financial system. Given that complexity and just your statement, how difficult is it for us really to be on the front end of this curve rather than being reactive, trying to catch up?
Well, I think, again, I hate to keep coming back to it, but the big problem I see are the unregulated and unregistered exchanges. I think we can keep up with more resources and more people, more agents knowing what this is. I think we can keep up where we have tumblers and mixers or virtual currency exchangers in the U.S. subject to our jurisdiction, and we have some choice in 1960 prosecutions. I think we can keep up. Where we have a problem is in getting at that information or forcing compliance from these overseas entities. And not surprisingly, the bad actors, the terrorists and the massive cyber criminals are not using the registered Coinbases of the world that are in San Francisco, that are registered with FinCEN. So I think that is going to be a problem, and we can't keep up with those as the matter currently stands. Now, one thing I would say is a lot of those businesses or ransomware campaigns, et cetera, or even these unregulated exchanges, they actually rely on a lot of U.S. companies and a lot of presence in the U.S. People are always surprised by this. They think, well, why would their servers be in the United States? Why would their infrastructure be in the United States? Well, we have reliable source of energy and power. We have massive companies like Amazon Web Services or Google who provide these hosting platforms. So these big unregulated, unregistered exchanges do use Google, Gmail, they use Microsoft, they use Amazon, and I think we could use some tools in our toolkit, statutory tools, to more easily chip away at those parts of their businesses that touch on the U.S.
Congressman Tipton, totally agree. The focus should be on the ingress and egress and conversion points, the unregistered, as she put it, exchangers around the world are the point, but I have a very dim view of us being able to cope with them effectively because the barrier to entry for setting up an exchange is so low. It doesn't require you to have a company. It requires you to have a server and some accounts with these different types of payment systems that you want to convert from and to. Very low. I've done research myself on thousands of these systems, rated them for anonymity, et cetera, and they're incredibly amorphous. They go up and come down regularly. They'll change into something else. You won't be able to identify exactly where they are or which systems they might be using in the background. There might be better signals intelligence type things that you could use to detect that. But we, I believe, are far, far, far behind, as well as law enforcement around the world, in coping with this. And these systems do gravitate towards areas with a relatively low rule of law. And oftentimes they seem to be, according to things I've read and researched, many times they are being protected by local political entities and law enforcement, and there are many stories that you could read about that online. I also want to make the point that the position that Bitcoin is not being used for any terrorist activities might be a bit stretched as well. It's not reported in the United States, but it's well reported in Europe, including Agence France-Presse, that 4 of the automatic weapons that were used in the Paris attacks were purchased with Bitcoin from an online dark market seller in Germany, and that was reported in open court documents in Stuttgart. So agree it's not a huge problem, but there are examples where you've got small groups that are using digital currencies, including Bitcoin, to anonymously buy what they need to carry out their heinous attacks.
The gentleman's time has expired. Would recognize the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Perlmutter.
A lot of Coloradans around here. I want to follow up on Mr. Tipton's line of questions and ask you, Mr. DeWicki, and you, Ms. Hahn, and to the rest of the panel, okay, tell me when you say an unregistered exchange, what is that? And in your testimony, Mr. DeWicki, you talked about a number of different things, web money and perfect money and dark money and all Alipay. I mean, do you consider that an exchange, or is that a medium of transfer? Or help us understand your terminology.
I teach a 2-day course on this, so it's not necessarily that easy. But the terminology, and I'd be happy to provide the committee with a topology, a single-page topology that makes sense of these different characteristics. When you're talking about the large providers like PayPal, WebMoney, Alipay, they do have the ability to act as an exchanger as part of their overall digital payment system. And certainly with systems like WebMoney that have been shown by other researchers to not be doing strong know your customer, they are suspect and are certainly being used for criminal activities, and a lot of that is they're not doing that good KYC up front. However, what Ms. Hahn is talking about, and I've referred to with these other exchangers, are entities that set themselves up specifically to exchange one virtual currency for another virtual currency, or for a fiat currency, or for a mobile money system. And all it requires really is a computer, accounts to be set up with these different services, and some level of liquidity, which oftentimes is one of the limiting factors in how effective these exchangers are, is how much money they have to buy and sell. They might only have $20,000, $30,000 on hand, whereas the big ones, of course, like Coinbase, have many millions.
All right, so they're kind of the fence in this thing? Like, you know, I mean, they're fencing the stolen goods?
Not so much fencing. I mean, it's really just think of a currency exchanger on the street of some country, right? You go and give money, one type of money, and they give you another type of money coming back. It's that, but in a much larger sense for digital payment systems, and the level of anonymity for these unregistered ones can be extremely high because typically they're not doing the KYC, they're not doing the AML checks.
They don't care whether it's dirty money or not.
Right.
So, I mean, to answer your question directly, if I want to use Bitcoin, I need to first acquire some Bitcoin.
Right.
Typically, the way you do that is you go to an exchanger and you give them dollars and they give you Bitcoin. That exchanger in the U.S. is a Bank Secrecy Act regulated entity and has to register with FinCEN, keep records of its customers, and report suspicious activities. So that would be a registered exchange. And that is who Ms. Hahn would go to when she's using Mr. Levin's software, finds a bad guy. She can go to an exchange and say, who is this person, and get the information. Overseas, we see unregistered exchanges, exchanges who, although they're required to, do not comply with the Bank Secrecy Act. And so when Ms. Hahn requests information from them, I bet she doesn't hear back from them. That's what an unregistered exchange is.
Go ahead.
Or we hear back from them. In a good case scenario, I had an MLAT with Japan, for example, where we have attaché on the ground, cooperative partners on the other side, and that even took at least 6 months in a very high-profile case to even get that evidence. So that's in a good case where we have to go to another country, we can get something. But I think there's another step beyond that, which is an exchange in, say, Russia, right? Not only could we not go to them, but if we go to them, we know what we find back is, and we've actually found this in returns before and evidence before, is the owner of this account is Mickey Mouse, who resides at 123 Main Street. that's actually...
No, but I guess that's what I'm worried about, that we have some nation states that are actually fostering, making these exchanges impossible to pierce, to understand, to find, whether they're trying to avoid sanctions, whether it's North Korea or Russia avoiding sanctions, or helping some criminal enterprise, or underwriting some terrorist organization that's out there doing bad things. So, I mean, I'm very concerned about how we stretch this globally to get countries that we may be at odds with, like Russia or maybe China, to participate. Are we doing that?
And that's where a public-private partnership, having an association where there can be a real, mercantile reason for them to want to participate, and where there's a push from the corporations, the companies themselves to want to be part of this. And you've seen this recently in Russia with Kiwi and Yandex Money have started just in the last year following AML and KYC, while WebMoney hasn't. So part of them, they want to be integrated in with European payment systems. The other one is kind of remaining off on its own. But that type of public-private partnership where you can get them to work together with other countries and other companies, I think is key, because you're not going to be able to do this by dictate from the United States, I don't think.
All right, thank you.
So it's normal. That's normal criminal activity. Criminals are going to go where the least path of resistance is. So if I can go exchange my Bitcoin to an exchanger that's not compliant with U.S. laws, that's what I'm going to do. So that's that issue there, is that they're trying to circumvent our AML procedures, and they're using, all criminals do that all the time. So that's something else that we need to look out for. It's further down the line, it's happening, but the bigger issue is, trying to get these guys trained up to notice this kind of criminal behavior happening.
Okay, thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair would now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Chairman Pierce, and to all the witnesses today. This has been great. I want to spend my time this morning focused on money laundering, specifically trade-based money laundering, which, as you know, is just one method used to launder illicit proceeds, and how that relates to virtual currency. According to the FATF report on virtual currencies, two major themes have developed. One, virtual currencies are the wave of the future for payment systems, and two, virtual currencies provide a powerful new tool for criminals, terrorist financiers, and other sanction evaders to move and store illicit funds out of reach of the law enforcement and other authorities. So let me start with you, Mr. Duecki. In your testimony, you spoke about the capability to move unlimited amounts of funds completely outside of the Western financial system. You also mentioned transfers to and from terrorist organizations, especially as part of a trade-based money laundering scheme, to cause the investigators to lose their money trail. As we've heard many times during our previous hearing, these schemes can be highly complicated, so virtual currencies just add another layer. So my question is, can you expand on the steps we need to take to help all of the stakeholders involved, whether that be local law enforcement or financial regulators or private companies? I'm a private sector guy. And to understand the scope and scale of these schemes?
Well, I think the key is education. I've participated in some investigations where people have had, information on different bad actors and had it sitting there for a year because they didn't know what web money was. They didn't know what these systems were or how they could interact with other components of a trade-based money laundering schema. And all it really takes is one leg of maybe, a lot of these trade-based money laundering schemes can include 4 or 5 different hops, cars for drugs, for whatever, and all you need is one component to jump in and out of one of these virtual currencies, whether they be centralized or decentralized. Probably more likely to be decentralized than centralized like Bitcoin, or decentralized, I'm sorry, more likely to be centralized than decentralized, because when you're using a system like Bitcoin, a large transaction is going to stand out, and it will be tracked by elliptic or Chainalysis. But if you're bringing it in and out of a centralized system, and perhaps you're working with the Russian mob or something like that, it's not going to show up and be detected by anybody, and it's going to allow you to basically, lose the trail of investigators that are following it through traditional mechanisms. Okay. So I think that the first step has to be education. You have to have people start to understand what's possible, because when we did that in past training, there were huge breakthroughs that resulted almost immediately because they found that, oh wow, the bad guys were using these systems as part of this, and we just had no idea what we were looking at.
Okay, let me switch topics real quick, Ms. Hahn. Section 13 of the Combating Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing, and Counterfeiting Act of 2017, a bill introduced by Senator Chuck Grassley and Dianne Feinstein, directs the Department of Homeland Security and Customs Border Protection to provide a report detailing a strategy to detect prepaid access devices and digital currency at border crossing and ports of entry. So my question would be, what are your thoughts on this bill, and what are the pros and cons of including prepaid cards regulation in that regulation?
Well, I think that prepaid cards, we've seen that prepaid cards are used by nefarious actors quite a bit. And so I think that it's sensible to include prepaid cards, if that's your question, in that bill. And I've only just seen reporting of it. I haven't yet had an opportunity to read the bill itself. But I think this is what I was saying about giving, there is some already regulatory guidance, but giving the statutory, making the statutes explicit, give prosecutors a lot more of a path, a clear path to bringing cases. And we saw this with 1960, where there was a case in Florida where a judge said, well, I don't think 1960 includes virtual currency. So I think this would be getting at remedying something like that.
Okay. Got a little bit of time left. Let me come back to you, Mr. Duecki. Can you go into more depth about the Identity and Payments Association you launched and what the role they can play?
So I had been part of a lot of conferences around the world where I had heard story after story about the de-risking of virtual currency providers, exchangers, remittance companies, mobile payment companies that were basically losing their bank accounts because banks didn't understand it, et cetera. And I saw that really what was needed was some sort of public-private partnership to take all of the regulators and law enforcement around the world that I had been working with and training, bring them together with industry members to find a common path forward where we could agree on best practices, where we could agree on basically a coda like Visa and MasterCard have. In fact, I have one of their former VPs working with me on this, where you basically could set up a rule set where if you follow all of this, you identify a person given these steps, you're not going to be liable to prosecution, or you'll be considered in somewhat of a regulatory compliance. And that would require this public-private partnership. So that is at the heart of what IDPay, the Identity and Payments Association, is intended to provide. Because there is nothing like that globally. It's all done by individual countries, and not very many of them are tackling this topic. So because of the global nature of the ecosystem, it needs to be tackled globally, and it will require some sort of NGO to do that.
Okay, thank you all for being here. I yield my time.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Rothfuss for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Levin, as we look at other governments hostile to the United States developing anonymous weaponized cryptocurrencies for use against us, by criminal or terror organizations, do you have thoughts on how the U.S. or the international community could counter those efforts?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So I think that when I think about what this testimony is about, is it's about virtual currencies that are truly global and decentralized. If the adversary is choosing to account for trades within its own organization on some sort of ledger, that doesn't really pertain to what Congress or anyone else can do about those types of payments. What we're talking about is a financial system in which everyone in the world can access virtual currencies, as I understand it, as Bitcoin. And for that, the US government can have eyes on those types of transactions and would need to be able to have tools in order to understand the purposes and the actors that are behind those transactions. So I am less worried, actually, of states producing their own virtual currencies in no matter what technology they use, because the risk to our society is mostly around being able to fund and send value to anyone in the world to carry out acts like we've seen in the past.
So you're not concerned about any kind of like internal...
Yes, because those types of systems already exist, and while we cannot have eyes on them, we have no way to put any pressure on those types of systems.
If I could ask Ms. Juan Rodriguez, the idea that virtual currencies out there, Bitcoin, that's going to be an asset that perhaps a bad actor is going to have. What would be the possibility of using our asset forfeitures procedures to go after that a virtual currency? I mean, can we do that? How would you do that?
Yes, in fact, we have done that, and we've used exactly that authority. So in a case I had, we seized those assets under the asset forfeiture laws upon a proper, of course, judicial order. And right now there's a lot of question about how do we auction those off? What does the government, now that we own these because they've been forfeited, what do we do? What does the government do? We're the holders of Bitcoin now, and there's a series of disparate things that have happened. I mean, the Marshal Service has auctioned them off. So yes, we can do that, and we should do that. In fact, a case against an exchange in the United States that my office did involving Ripple Labs in 2013. We brought the first ever enforcement action against a virtual currency company ever. We teamed up with FinCEN to do so, and they had to pay also and forfeit a $700,000 penalty. Also, they had to take a number of remedial steps, so now they collect customer data. They must follow all AML laws, know your customers, and they collect customer identity. But I think that the asset forfeiture laws are an important tool as part of this. That's particularly true if we are ever to get to some of the overseas exchanges, because, of course, they have correspondent banking accounts with banks, including in the United States. And I would think that would be an appropriate case to use those laws.
Mr. Brito, do you foresee any widespread acceptance of virtual currencies by small to medium-sized businesses in the future whereby domestic criminals could launder illicit profits into Bitcoin or virtual currencies?
It's certainly possible. I think, however, that cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin really can't compete in the developed world with our existing financial system. We've got credit cards, we've got cash, we've got access to just, our phones can pay for things, and they do it really frictionlessly and very well. Where digital currencies, I think, are going to really thrive is going to be in the developing world where they don't have access to those financial systems, and there really isn't an incentive for networks to go in and develop those networks. So I think that's where we will see retail payments take up for cryptocurrency. In the developed world, where I think cryptocurrency has a truly bright future, are for really novel uses that our existing financial system really can't accommodate. Things like microtransactions, transactions that maybe are a trade settlement of sort of other assets.
Yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Davidson. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our guests. I really appreciate the information you're giving us and the tools you're helping us be equipped with to keep our laws current. I'm particularly struck by the analogies to the internet, but also it seems to me that some of this stuff with blockchain is a little bit like the cell phone. Did criminals gain an advantage when they could communicate by cell phone? Well, of course they did, but so did the rest of the planet. And I think they're going to be just about as hard to contain, so those of you that have mentioned that, I think people are going to be able to do blockchain transactions of all sorts, including in currencies. Mr. Wilson, I was particularly struck by your opening remarks where you talked about how we can detect the activity. And it seems that if we have this ability, which we theoretically should, that we would be able to find the missing Mt. Gox coins. Why can't we?
So we actually did find those.
Okay,
yeah. So Chainalysis was the official investigators in the Mt. Gox bankruptcy case, and the destination of those coins is definitely known.
Okay, terrific. So what happens to lost coins in general? So if they're stolen and you find them, what happens when people lose them? You lose your credit card, you can cancel them. You lose your key to a car, you can get it rekeyed. What happens when you lose lost cryptocurrency?
It's the same thing that happens when you drop a dollar bill into a fire, right? If you lose a dollar and it's at the bottom of the ocean, or something bad happened to it, the Federal Reserve does not replace it for you. Same thing with Bitcoin.
It's bad password to lose.
Yes.
Okay. So how are, I guess, without compromising trade secrets, how are we doing? And I understand that Mr. Levin and Mr. Wilson, your organizations are working to track mixers and other tumblers, things like this, that are making it hard to find currency. Is that accurate?
Yes, it is. We are tracing those as well.
Okay, so these are the most complex things. How is this different? So regular currency, foreign exchange, is regulated in the United States by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. They, rightly or wrongly, in my opinion wrongly, restricted the number of people that can trade currencies by raising the capital requirements. I think it puts the U.S. at a disadvantage in one of the world's most important markets. And I'm concerned that our regulatory framework with cryptocurrency is going to further hinder our ability to do it. Can't currency be regulated by one organization, whether it's physical or virtual?
I think the answer to that could be yes, and it would definitely allow businesses to be more compliant and put their efforts into one domain. I think that also if that regulator adopts technology that is in line with digital currencies like Bitcoin and has tools and automation that will definitely allow the United States to have a business environment that thrives whilst thwarting bad actors.
Digital currencies are one of the most regulated sectors within fintech.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that they're subject to many different regulators and jurisdictions. So at the federal level, you have IRS, you have CFPB, you have FinCEN, there have been FTC enforcements, there are many. But really the largest sort of barrier is state-by-state regulation. Because if you're a digital currency exchanger or some other kind of custodian for digital currencies, the consumer protection regulation today is done at the state level. So if you're an exchanger, you need to get a license from every state in which you do business.
Right. Yeah. So you made that point, and it's a good one. But why is digital currency so much different than foreign exchange? Why would it be? What is necessary to be treated differently about this, other than you have to have different technology?
Because digital currency exchanges are considered money transmitters, and money transmitters are regulated at the state level.
So are foreign currency exchangers.
Sure, and right. So it's kind of the same, right? You have the CFT.
Aren't they essentially involved in the same business? If I want to convert U.S. dollars to pounds sterling or euros or RMB, whatever, you can do that through.
It's similar. The one really different piece is that foreign currency is defined in law, whereas digital currency is defined as basically the other category. But that's as far as money laundering is concerned.
I think also it is different in the sense that you can operate very, and this is probably too technical for this setting, but there are many different types of business model that can exist built on blockchain technology, which may not have perfect analogies in the existing financial system, which require people to actually understand the technology in order to regulate it properly.
All right. I look forward to working with you all. My time has expired. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. As time has expired, the chair now recognizes Mr. Hill for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman very much. Appreciate the panel's time. This has been a really interesting discussion about a topic that probably needs more exposure in Congress across a number of committees. Ms. Han Rodriguez, I was particularly interested in your testimony because we've had a lot of talk about the currencies, we've had a lot of talk about blockchain, but I'm real interested in the ways that we have our laws, our regulations, our oversight structured in such a way that we do a better job in our government of either assessing their need for oversight, regulation at the federal level, or the interdiction, capture, and discovery of them. So you referenced extensively in your testimony about our MLATs around the world between the United States and our allies and other countries. And you referenced some need to modify our MLATs for this particular purpose. Could you go a little bit more specific and tell the committee just what particularly we ought to amend in our basic MLAT treaty with other countries to capture this discovery and prosecution area? Thanks.
And I should note that this isn't just a problem. I also did a number of cybercrime cases not involving cryptocurrency. This MLAT problem is not unique.
And you can be broad in that.
Right, and so it really is a problem. I think if you talk to prosecutors across the country who are dealing with cybercrime and cryptocurrency cases, they will tell you one of the biggest problems is the problems of getting MLATs through. And it's always, we're in a good position where we have an MLAT, right? Because at least then we have a country we can work with. But the problems are essentially these. I mean, the speed, the MLAT process was developed decades ago, and in the days where you didn't have email even, right? These were done maybe by couriered mail, and the problem is that the systems have largely stayed the same. And I'll just give you an example. I had an MLAT going, and it was to a receptive country. The actual company in that country wanted to give us the data. They would have emailed it to us right away, and it would have let us get the bad guy instead of letting that bad guy keep doing bad acts. But instead, we have to go through the MLAT process, and even to get it out of our own country to theirs took 5 months.
So have you seen an effort by the Department of State and the Department of Justice to form a task force between the two and streamline and make recommendations? And is there anything Congress can do particularly on that?
I don't know that it's a State Department issue. I think it's more handled out of the Office of International Affairs in the Justice Department is the entity that handles the MLATs. And one of the things is you go from, like, say, I mean, I used to be in headquarters, but I've been out in San Francisco for the last 8 years. I'm out in the field. I draft up the MLAT. I have to send it back to the OIA attorney. They have 5 levels of review. I think it's off with the country, but no, lo and behold, it comes back to me so we can fill out a budget form so that we can get it translated. In other words, it hasn't even gone to our foreign counterparts who are sitting there waiting to turn over the evidence to us. Well, the budget form's completed, and then we have
the ship is in the dock waiting to transport.
Right. Well, then we have to go to a certain kind of not just any translator.
Yeah.
Only certain ones are approved. Well, they have a backlog because they have all the government contracts, so they're not going to be able to translate ours quickly. Okay, so you already see the point. The problem is even leaving, even a fully baked MLAT to get overseas, it doesn't happen for months. And that's in a good case. That's in a high priority case where the department's willing to pay to expedite and the rest. And the problem with that system, Congressman, is that what ends up happening is we even now need to send MLATs to get evidence preserved. Well, if a company overseas has a 3-month, as some of these telecom companies do, have 3-month preservation periods, if we don't get an MLAT request over for 6 months, our evidence is just gone. So I think part of the problem is internal and the processes by which it goes, and I don't want to upset any of my colleagues in the Justice Department by suggesting that Congress needs to form a task force, but it is something that really needs to be looked at, the process, in the age of cybercrime and in the age where we're moving to a world where more and more evidence in every case is electronic, right? No matter the type of case. So that's, I don't know if that illustrates.
Well, I appreciate your passion on the answer. This has come up in previous testimonies in the last Congress, not quite with the passion and the direct answer that you've given today, and I appreciate your service in criminal prosecutions, your service to the people of the U.S., and Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to question.
Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Budd for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the panel as well for your time. I think it was Mr. Brito, you asked earlier, or you mentioned about you would lose, as you lost a dollar bill in a fire, you could lose virtual currency. Isn't there some sort of a virtual wallet that is recommended or a best practice? And if so, could you, if that does exist, can you explain what that is and how it works?
Sure. So there are essentially 2 ways in which you can hold digital currency, kind of the same as cash. You can hold it on your person, the way you might hold a $100 bill with you, or you can deposit it with a custodial institution. So if you deposit it with them and they are regulated and you trust them and they have good security measures, that's pretty safe. If you decide to hold the digital currency yourself, it has one advantage that a dollar doesn't, which is you can make a backup copy. Of course, you have to keep that backup copy safe. But that's essentially it. You want to use some a good, reputable wallet software, something that is open source and that has been audited by the community. And you want to make sure that you have good backups in safe places, and that you never forget your password.
Okay, very good. There was a great interview recently. I think it's a good 101 for a lot of us in here that are new to this, on the Tim Ferriss show with Nick Szabo. I don't know if he's a recognized name in your industry, but it was a great primer earlier this week for me. I went to Seoul, Korea last week, into the DMZ. And as we looked over into North Korea, you could see there's not much of an economy there. And yet it's a country that we've seen is very strong in cyber offense. And they've doubled down on that, as we know, moving towards a nuclear state as well. But with their cyber, what do we see, and I'll open this up to the whole panel, what do we see a country like North Korea doing with illicit uses of virtual currencies?
So I've seen media reports that some of the ransomware that we've seen attack different private companies and public sector organizations could be traced back to North Korea. And you can imagine that North Korea, if this is true, would see ransomware as a revenue-generating activity. Of course, if they acquire Bitcoin or some other digital currency, they need to offload that. And so they would need to go through an exchange. I bet they would go through an unregulated, unregistered exchange.
So I have I've seen the same sort of reports, and although as Ms. Horn will know, that attribution in cybercrime cases is very, very difficult to attain the identity of people who do them. What I have seen is, and I mentioned it in my written testimony, I have seen ransomware campaigns run in domains that I would consider hotbeds potentially for terrorist activity. And it is about making a profit out of this type of activity in order to fund operations. So I think that risk does exist. We actually have seen that there are very limited exchanges in a lot of these places. So we monitor for is there liquidity in those local markets to cash out for virtual currency activity? For example, there is no domestic North Korean exchange that you can cash virtual currencies into local currency. However, there are virtual currency exchanges in other parts of the Middle East, although liquidity is fairly limited. I know of 2 exchanges where the joint liquidity in their existence has been $2 million.
Wouldn't you say, Mr. Levin, that it would be better for a country like North Korea to stay in virtual currency rather than egress or come out of it?
So I would say the most likely thing that would happen is that they would use the virtual currency in order to pay for potentially internet infrastructure that actually exists, maybe even in the United States or offshores.
And for the panel, I'm sorry, Mrs. Hahn, did you have a comment there?
Oh, no, thank you.
For the whole panel as well, sorry, I had another question there. Do you have any ideas to the total volume that, or a guess, or that you would see North Korea doing through virtual currencies?
Geographic identification of virtual currency transactions is somewhat difficult, especially where there is no exchanger present in that local market. So companies like mine can identify the services that are providing virtual currency services like exchange, like merchant processing. But if there are no sort of North Korean exchanges, it's very difficult for us to be able to assess how much volume is in North Korea.
Thank you. I yield back.
Chair, the gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes Mr. Lynch for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I know the last time we spoke, we spoke about the committee members perhaps taking advantage of the webinars, any other training opportunities to educate the members. So committee staff will be reaching out to each of you on that. Let me give you an extreme example. Somalia. So we're having problems. Highly insecure environment, very low capacity among the government there, fair amount of corruption. All of the banks have basically pulled out of that area. They won't even set up ATMs anymore. Al-Shabaab, very active. The secure district is actually limited to a small sub-district in Mogadishu around the airport. Even when we fly in, it's tough to get out of the airport until really recently. And again, they get this aversion by regular banks, so remittances can't get in there. So we got a real problem. How could this system, cryptocurrencies, I know we're sort of wargaming this on the fly, but how could this help in an area like that where we've had so there's so much reputational risk on the part of the banks that they won't go in there because of ironically, because of our anti-terrorist financing laws, Bank Secrecy Act and all those. So the banks won't go near it because they'll say, we don't want to be prosecuted in case Al-Shabaab gets the resources. How is there an opportunity here that, on payment systems, is there some way we might help the people who want to just send money back to their families?
Yes. Yeah, and I think, that is one of the key use cases that drove me to create the Identity and Payments Association, where you have a community that is cut off from the banking world, that is relying on remittance systems like M-Pesa or World Remit or a few others, that have been impacted by AML and CFT efforts that have cut them off in some instances from Somali populations in Minneapolis or wherever. And while they're relying on those systems now, they are prone to disruption, and certainly having an enhanced, in this case, cryptocurrency, decentralized virtual currency connection point with those systems, if done in concert with somebody like WorldRemit, who is a very responsible player and tries very hard to identify the users of its system, then you would have an even more reliable, more transparent component where you would have Bitcoin or a blockchain-based system be able to interface with those last-mile mobile payment remittance providers. So yes, I think it would be able to extend the secure paradigm further out into the Somali populations to allow them to get money to those people who need it the most and do it in a responsible, transparent way. But you're going to have some sort of relationship with a lot of different players because there are a lot of Somali populations around the world.
If I can address that. So
Sure.
If I could just say that
please, yeah.
The Charity and Security Network is a nonprofit that represents other nonprofits.
What is the name of it again?
Charity and Security Network.
Okay.
And they published a report recently that looked at exactly the problem you're describing. And it's not just conflict areas like Somalia or Syria where they're having trouble getting payments in. It's Latin America. It's Europe even. Yeah. And we're actually going to be, so Coin Center will be working with the Charity and Security Network to develop a pilot program to potentially send grant money from the U.S. to Mexico, to nonprofits in Mexico who are running grant programs using Bitcoin.
Wow,
that's great. I could also add to that. I think the interesting thing about having a cryptocurrency on the underlayer of this is that the traditional financial system relies when money goes from a bank to a money transmitter and then gets sent to Somalia, the bank gets very nervous because it has no ability to have any insight into the underlying transaction to the their customer's customer. Well, Bitcoin allows, and I've actually implemented this with Barclays and Circle Financial, which are two sort of well-known fintech companies, is that the bank is actually able in real time to know what is the underlying activity of its customer, not on an individual who is the identity of the person, but potentially what is the exposure to underground market activity or ransomware or the terrorist financing activity that we're interested in. So I'd like to point that case study and happy to go further in more detail.
That's great. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired, and the chair would recognize Mr. Pittenger for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank each of you for being here and to give us your sound advice. You know, we're dealing with very sophisticated people, as we have found in the past. And this is not a backyard gang of hoodlums. They look for every possible avenue to complete their efforts. I would like to say that as we consider the cryptocurrencies, while they are not well known to the public at large, and they are growing, certainly to these folks, they're on the radar screen, and we, as I said earlier, should anticipate that they will be more engaged, more likely in outside the United States, as you said, where we don't have the capacity for oversight that we have here. I would welcome your involvement, particularly with the media. I think you play a role there, and I think you can help define what you're doing in terms of defensive postures and offensively, and to mitigate this concern. I think we need each of us to speak to this more, to let the public and as well that the Congress be more adept in these concerns. So on your radar screen, I hope that you'll consider a more aggressive outreach to try to work with the media and to help tell your story. Thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair would yield himself another 5 minutes. Mr. Mr. Wilson or Mr. Levin, as we discussed, the world remit it and the retroactive nature of it. In the current system, can we assure the same way that Western Union might be able to assure that crypto going into Syria or Somalia could be traced and maybe stopped before the incident? Discuss that just a bit if you can.
Sure, Mr. Chairman. So when you send virtual currency transactions outward, you may not know the geographic distribution of that, where the person you're about to send it to. Because if you consider Bitcoin, it is transfers within Bitcoin are not sent to routing numbers or account numbers that have any real-world identification system. Instead, what you need to do is then look after the fact in order to understand what is the activity potentially for that transaction. If we go back to the analogy of the masks, if you are sending it to someone that you have seen before, then you might know that this is, yes, this Bitcoin address does belong to a virtual currency exchange in Iran, for example, and you would be able to block that at the time of transaction if you are an exchange here in the US. However, if someone is using a new virtual currency address, which are quite easy to create, there is no way to know that at the time, and instead these companies are forced to retrospectively look at all of their transactions in order to identify what was the activity maybe after the fact.
Mr. Wilson?
So exactly what Jonathan said, what we do is after the fact, look at the transaction. We can tell, again, if this is something that's masked and we've already tagged it to be a nefarious exchanger or a nefarious entity, we can then, alert the institution that's making this transaction and say, hey, this is, a possible, a place that you don't want to send money to. So that's kind of how it works right now.
Ms. Hahn, I would appreciate your observation on the same question if you can, because really looking at Western Union and their, I guess that they know both parties, that we have some understanding of who is on the other end, and they then will maybe even blacklist entire regions because of the risk, but it's not anonymous, I see there. You have an observation?
Well, I'm not sure. I also know that Western Union has actually been paying some hefty fines, and I think was just the subject of a FinCEN enforcement action for, about a year ago. $800,000. $800,000. Yeah.
Or $800 million. I'm sorry.
$800 million. That sounds
sorry,
more.
that's more, yeah.
For not always following the things that they're supposed to do under the law. But I think I agree entirely with what Mr. Wilson and Mr. Levin said. I don't have much to add beyond that, other than to say it is much more difficult where you don't know where this is going to, unless you have a way of, if they haven't used a Mixer or a Tumblr and they're using the same virtual currency address, but they rarely do. The sophisticated people who are moving money use sophisticated mechanisms and they create new addresses.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank each one of you today for your testimony. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the chair, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. I ask our witnesses to respond as promptly as able. I would mention that I think everyone on the subcommittee really appreciates the directness and the depth of your analysis and the substance of your answers. I think that all of you have provided very valuable insights into a field that we must be learning a lot more about. With that, the hearing is adjourned.
And that was a long video. 2 hours of our life, give or take, listening to that information and listening to everything that was said in that video, which is just a little bit too much for us to go over right now and right here. What I would prefer to know, what I'd like to know is, what did you find most interesting? What did you hear that affected you the most? please let us know in the comments below, and let's have a discussion about that. And if there's any interesting topics that you want to know more about, perhaps then we can make a video about that to explore that topic a little deeper. So with that being said, thanks for showing up. Thanks for staying with us and watching this video, learning about this information, hearing for yourself firsthand what these congressional leaders heard. You received the same information that they received. So if this information was interesting to you, if this video was helpful for the community or for you, then feel free to tap that like button, share this video, comment your thoughts below, and until next time, I'm glad that we're minting coins.